Hey, everybody. Welcome to a special broadcast of Freedom Talk. Obviously, the past 2 days have been historic with the Kari Lake versus Katie Hobbs trial. Many of you have watched that, and some of you have asked me to rebroadcast the closing arguments, the rebuttal, and all of that kind of thing. So I got that together, and I'm going to show that to you in a moment and provide some commentary. But I want to say something after watching this trial, after getting a real insider's view of things. If these people who stole this election think that they have the consent of the governed after all this, they better think again. Okay, guys, I'm going to try to keep this short. I'm going to play the closing arguments starting with Kari Lake's lead lawyer and the closing argument by the defendants, and then a rebuttal by the plaintiff's representative. So here we go.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor has heard 2 days of testimony, sworn testimony. Some of it doesn't make sense. Some of it does. The law in Arizona is that an election challenger must put forward evidence sufficient to show that the outcome is wrong or at least uncertain. And that is the seminal case of Finley v. Sorensen. Plaintiffs have met that standard. There's just a little over 17,000 votes out of nearly 1.6 million that separate the candidates. That's less than 0.06%. The two issues that Your Honor directed plaintiff to support, that was intentional conduct with the tabulators in terms of the malfunctions, the rejections that occurred on election day, and also the chain of custody issue. We've done that, Your Honor. We heard some startling testimony. I had to kind of regroup here from what my prepared closing remarks. And that startling testimony from Mr. Jarrett today, it just doesn't make sense. And I'll say why. And this is in terms of whether when we showed through the inspection of ballots, a random selection of ballots from six voting centers, not 3, 6. Mr. Parikh found evidence, ballots that had 19-inch images imprinted on them on 20-inch sized paper. He found that in all 6 vote centers that were randomly selected. Mr. Jarrett yesterday testified under oath when he was asked that could it happen or did it happen that a 19-inch image was imprinted on a 20-inch piece of paper, and he testified no. And not only that, his counsel, Mr. Liddy, went with the shrink to fit excuse, and he never said, oh yeah, that's what happened. We've known about this since shortly after the election, and we're doing a root cause analysis. None of this, it doesn't make sense. Another thing that doesn't make sense, they're doing a root cause analysis now, yet he says that, well, this has happened in 3 prior elections. Why are you doing a root cause analysis on this if this same event, this shrink to fit issue, arose in 3 prior elections? The other thing that doesn't make sense about this shrink to fit excuse is that it's illegal under Arizona law to modify a ballot after it's been set. You just can't do that. And they're saying that it happened not only in this election, but in 3 prior elections? It just doesn't make sense, Your Honor. The other thing that doesn't make sense is that somehow, and you heard Mr. Macias, he kind of equivocated on this shrink to fit argument about whether you could get it to exactly 19 inches. So all of a sudden, there are supposedly techs that are running around making modifications on election day, which, by the way, has happened in 3 prior elections, and they're all getting it to exactly 19 inches for shrink to fit. Random techs just kind of doing things on their own. This doesn't make sense, Your Honor. And I'm actually troubled to even be talking about this. The idea that when I questioned Mr. Jarrett about this issue, and he said unequivocally it could not happen, and his counsel then trying to clean this up said, well, what about, shrink to fit? That he didn't immediately say, yeah, that was it, when he's supposedly known about it since shortly after the election? It doesn't make sense, Your Honor.
Sure doesn't.
The same thing with respect to the conflicting testimony regarding whether it's chaos or massive disruption that occurred on election day with 200 plus declarants. You have Mr. Barris who's doing exit polls and talking to people on election day, news reports. You have other witnesses, Mr. Sonnenclair, who testified that he and his fellow roving observers went to 115 vote centers, the same thing. So you have independent sources talking about massive chaos at well over 50+%, about 59%. By the county's own admission, it would be 30, about a third, 70 vote centers. Or as counsel has been, and their witnesses have been saying up here, these are just kind of minor technical difficulties that you expect in every election. It's not even close. It's like 2 ships passing in the night. The fact that they would downplay.
Pay attention to the judge's body language. He's really paying attention. He's taking notes. And then watch when the defendant speaks.
What happened on election day that everybody knows? I think the word that came out, I read a couple months ago, was gaslighting. And that's like telling you to your face what you know is not true and what they know is not true, but they're going to tell you anyway. The disconnect here is very troubling. We put on sworn testimony, either on the stand or through sworn declarations, people who put their name and made it public in a time in our country when to put yourself out, as they did, is not exactly something that doesn't carry risk.
Boy, do I know about that.
And I'm sure you've heard about cancel culture and everything else. There were hundreds of people who came to tell the truth about what happened on election day. And even Supervisor Gates, early on in the election, when he was giving a press conference, characterized it as chaos. And then on November 28th, they have an update, and it's like, yeah, I think the election was run pretty well. It's like the story just kind of shifted. This just doesn't happen, Your Honor. We have independent sources that say election day was chaotic and was a mess. And it absolutely disenfranchised voters. There were long lines everywhere. And we put forward specific, compelling evidence of quantifiable shifts in votes through Mr. Barris, a range of 15,000 to 29,000 votes, Republican votes. And he said that was a conservative estimate. The defendants put up this expert from the University of Wisconsin. And his bias, for one thing, was completely obvious. But he had to admit that the county, which bases its whole election plan on modeling turnout, they had a high model of 290,000 projected for 2022 with a low model of 250,000. And as you heard testimony, that low model was performed prior to the election, as it must, and it did not account for any kind of election day chaos. So that was a perfect election, just with a little bit lower turnout, in a time when everybody knew Republican turnout on election day, because even his counsel repeatedly said, Republican leaders were telling people to not vote by mail and to come out on election day. And guess what? They did. And then just so happened that pandemonium ensued. And whether you believe it's a shrink to fit allegation in 3 vote centers, when we know we have direct evidence that it's in all six of the 6 that Mr. Parikh inspected.
Now, keep that in mind when the defense presents their side, that everyone knew that the Republicans were going to show up in force on the day because they didn't trust mail-in and early ballots. And watch how the defense goes on the attack about that in a moment.
Had that same 19-inch ballot image imprinted on a 20-inch piece of paper. There's no doubt that that caused mayhem. There's no doubt that it caused long lines. You have this professor from University of Wisconsin who comes out and says, well, I looked at the wait time data from Maricopa County, and it says that the wait lines weren't that bad. Well, we have sworn testimony and charts in the record that shows they're far more. And Maricopa County has repeatedly downplayed and said that, as pretty well run election, Your Honor. It doesn't make sense. You don't get this kind of disconnect. I've never seen anything like this. All the witnesses, people who come up testifying on behalf of plaintiffs who have nothing to gain. They have nothing to gain by coming forward to testify about this. And then you have the defendant's witnesses come up and tell a completely different story. Like I said, it's just like 2 different worlds. On chain of custody, Mr. Richer admitted they estimated the amount of ballots that come into MTEC, that they don't know the count. Well, ARS 16621E says you will maintain chain of custody every step of the way. And the form that is filled out, that EVBT form, has a number for the ballots, the number of ballots in the drop boxes. They know the precise number. But now the excuse has shifted. Well, yeah, we don't count them at MTEC. When they go to Runbeck, we have employees there, even though they're dropping them off at MTEC. And as Leslie White in her declaration testified to, the trucks are coming in, they're cutting seals, they're throwing these ballots and taking them out of the bins and throwing them in trays, and nobody's counting the ballots. Nobody's taking the form that's with them and counting the ballots. Now, having heard this testimony, they've come up and said, Mr. Jarrett came up today and said, well, when they're shipped up to Runbeck to be processed, because they're still in the envelopes and they're scanning the envelopes, well, yeah, we count them up there. Well, that makes no sense. They have taken those ballots out of the bins and delivered them to MTEC on election day. And we're talking about ballots that are delivered on election day. They take them out when the trucks get up to the ramp. They take them out of the bins. They break the seals. They're supposed to count them. If you don't have a count from MTEC when those ballots are being transported to Runbeck, how do you know whether that count is secure? They didn't follow the law. And by the way, we have a manifestation which still is unexplained. On November 9th, the reported count is 25,000 ballots less, which is beyond the margin here, than on November 10th. So the day after the election, they put out what the count is, and then magically 25,000 ballots appear on November 10th. And, well, hey, that's the race.
That is unbelievable. In one sense, I say believable because we've seen that kind of thing. Guys, there is so much malfeasance here, and it doesn't just qualify as a sloppily run election. They pulled out all the stops to keep Kari Lake out. Let's continue.
It doesn't make sense. This is just flat wrong, what is going on here. The law is there for a reason. The law is there to protect the integrity of the vote. And there's a quote from a Wisconsin Supreme Court decision that came out in July 2022 that I just want to read, Your Honor. And this was just about drop boxes. And so the issue here in Wisconsin was whether or not the Wisconsin Election Commission, which said, hey, we're going to go with unmanned drop boxes, and the statute said no unmanned drop boxes, but they did it anyway. And so it went up to the Supreme Court, or the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And here is what the Wisconsin Supreme Court stated. And I'll just, drop boxes are not that sexy, and chain of custody is not, but these are incredibly important issues to ensure the integrity of the vote. This is about trust. This is the people who are watching this. This whole thing is being televised. And they're hearing two different stories. And this is what the Wisconsin, 3 justices on the Wisconsin Supreme Court stated in this opinion. And the opinion is Teagan v. Wisconsin's Election Commission. The right to vote presupposes the rule of law governs elections. If elections are conducted outside the law, the people have not conferred their consent on the government. Such elections are unlawful, and their results are illegitimate. And they have a quote.
That is huge to me. And one thing I've preached a lot is that we need to remember that we have natural rights, that every single bit of this government is a contrivance that the founders created with the express purpose of protecting our natural rights. Now, when those natural rights are violated, and it's very obvious in this case, then we do not have to give our consent to that crookedness. We don't have to give our consent as the governed to a corrupt, cheating government.
Quote from John Adams that follows: if an election can be procured by a party through artifice or corruption, the government may be the choice of a party for its own ends, not of the nation for the national good. The testimony that this court heard today from the plaintiff's side was compelling, it was truthful, and it made sense. The testimony that Your Honor respectfully heard today from the defendants doesn't make sense. What Mr. Jarrett did on that stand today doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. 3 voting centers, we found this, shrink to fit. Mr. Parikh, I inspected 6 vote centers. A well-run election, pandemonium, chaos. From different sources. Everything corroborates, Your Honor, what the evidence that we have put forward is corroborative with respect to the violations of law, the intentional misconduct with respect to the malfunctions in the tabulators, and to the violations of the chain of custody rules. This is about trust, Your Honor. It's about restoring people's trust. There's not a person that's watching this thing that isn't shaking their head right now. And with that, Your Honor, I'll sit back.
Errors are those mishaps by machines.
All right, now this is the lawyer for the defendant, and I want you to listen to his tone and the absolute spite that he has toward you, toward voters. Just listen and try not to flip off your screen. One of our followers on Instagram said, every time this guy spoke, I was flipping off my screen. I won't confirm or deny that I was doing that too.
You will. The effect that had on Election Day voters was compounded, Your Honor, not by intentional misconduct by any employee or anybody under the control of Maricopa County, but by months and months and months of communication from the current leadership of the Republican Party of Arizona and the communications specialists of the Kari Lake for Governor campaign that said, do not vote early. Even if you're on the Pebble and you've got an early ballot, don't mail it. Don't drop it off the drop box. 2,000 mules. Bring your car maybe. Go on Election Day and vote on person. And Lord forbid, don't ever put your ballot in the drop box.
Well, so he's trying to blame this on Kari Lake and took a shot at Dinesh D'Souza there. There are good reasons we don't trust those drop boxes.
In the ballot box or in drawer number 3. Because there's something very scary about drawer number 3, which is nothing but a ballot box. It's what people all over the world do with their ballots. Vote it, stick it in the ballot box. But people were terrorized by that on Election Day. That's not on Maricopa County. That's on the Kari Lake for Governor campaign.
Wait, what? People were terrorized by Kari Lake's message to go on voting day? Wow. Wow.
That's on the Dr. Kelly Ward-led Republican Party communications apparatus. So we did not see in 2 days of testimony and all those affidavits that came in evidence of a botched election. We saw evidence of a botched campaign, political malpractice. Who goes out and tells their voters, don't vote on day one of voting, early
It's called the First Amendment, you jackass.
voting, day 2, day 3, all the way up to day 26 of early voting. Wait till the last second. That's political malpractice. You reap what you sow.
I've heard conspiracy theories,
Okay, back to the plaintiff. This is his rebuttal.
rank speculation, making up facts. You know what's not rank speculation or a work of fiction? The fact that there were 19-inch ballot images printed on 20-inch pieces of paper, and nobody talked about that until this trial. And nobody talked about a shrink to fit excuse for that until this trial, until Mr. Liddy got up here and asked Mr. Jarrett, and he denied that was the issue. And then he comes back today and says, well, yeah, we've known about that. It happened in 3 prior elections, and we're doing root cause analysis, and we figured this out, that this was the issue back in November. The 19-inch ballot image printed on 20-inch paper is a fact. They've now admitted it. They just shifted the excuse for the cause of it. They tried to say, well, the T-Tech, Mr. Bentoncorp contradicts it. No, he doesn't. Nobody knew what was going on with the printers. They were shaking printers. They were cleaning the tablet. They were doing all kinds of things because these printers weren't working. But we know from the inspection that 6 out of 6 randomly selected vote sites by Mr. Parikh had the 19-inch image printed on 20-inch paper and not 3 vote locations. The arguments from defendant's counsel don't make sense. And by the way, if these printers, the configurations had been changed, then this would have occurred uniformly from the time of the change. Every ballot from that point would be changed to this 19-inch configuration, which somehow got to 19 inches by their own statement at all 3 locations by different people making a change on shrink to fit that Mr. Macias was very hesitant to say, well, I don't know how it would get to exactly 19 inches, but the fact that they want to blame Republicans for coming out and voting on Election Day, that's atrocious. It's atrocious. It's in our Constitution to vote on Election Day. The county plans for turnout on Election Day. As a matter of fact, they plan for higher turnout with the 290,000 vote projection even before Republican leaders, they claim, were telling their constituents to come out and vote on Election Day. They planned on it. We're supposed to believe that they weren't ready to go? And if they weren't, then that is, again, consistent with our claims. But the fact is, Your Honor, that 19-inch ballot image on ballots from every single 6 locations that were inspected is a fact. It's a fact. And how arrogant it is to blame Republican or any voter, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, if they don't trust the system for whatever reason, and they want to cast their vote in the most secure manner possible, which is on Election Day. Earlier when we started out at opening, I said that, the Carter-Baker Commission in 2005 said that mail-in voting is the method of voting that is most vulnerable to fraud. So if a voter, whether they are Republican, Democrat, or independent, wants to see their vote get cast and counted, why is that wrong? Your Honor, the evidence shows that Kari Lake won this race. At a minimum, we have put forth solid evidence that the outcome of this election is uncertain. Mr. Barris's testimony, his modeling, which is actually even more detailed than what the county itself does, and his model is on the high end of what the county predicted, but Mr. Barris actually talked to voters. And as he testified to, they all consistently said, this thing was a train wreck. And in terms of the response rate, never before had he seen that, with a 20% drop in response rate out of hundreds of polls. He was not hired for this litigation. This was an observation that he had completely independent, and it didn't make sense absent the issues that occurred on Election Day. Your Honor, we put forward solid evidence, stand behind that evidence. We'd come back, they said, we didn't bring these other witnesses. If we had more time, we'll bring them here tomorrow. I'm not suggesting, but that has no bearing. So I want to thank Your Honor for giving us the opportunity to present this case, for the opportunity for people to see the evidence for themselves and judge. And with that, Your Honor, plaintiff rests.
All right. Well, I thought that was a great job by this lawyer, really do. And unfortunately, I've been to court more times than I would have liked. It's not a pleasant place to be, but just looking at this judge, looking at his body language, looking at how he was paying attention, I feel pretty good about this judge. I've sat before a couple that you could tell from the beginning they had their minds made up. I think this is a man who's really being careful and cautious and deliberate. And of course, we all hope that he will make the right decision. And I say the right decision because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, look at all the evidence that Kari Lake's team brought forward. And are you kidding me? Their defense was, well, it was the fault of Kari Lake's campaign for telling people to show up and vote in person. It was their fault, you see. It was your fault. And the utter contempt with which they treat you is just unbelievable and astounding. Now, I want to make a statement before I go. And I've watched Kari Lake quite a bit, talked with her quite a bit. I visited with her some at America Fest. And I've heard some people criticize her. And one of the criticisms is, well, she disaffected some voters. She alienated them, sort of the rhinos. So she should have been more moderate. I'll tell you something. We don't want these rhinos because Republican in name only. They're actually Democrats. And they've caused a lot of problems. But I do not believe that she lost this by any means. And as the lawyer said, I believe at worst, the outcome of this election is uncertain. But I think the plaintiff did an excellent job of proving their point. Another contention that people have is, well, Kari, maybe there was cheating, maybe there was, it was a sloppy election, whatever. But at some point, she should just move on and try again next time. How often are we going to kick that can down the road? How often are we going to say, well, you got to live with it. Doesn't matter if they cheated or not. I'll tell you something. That's not acceptable to me. And I'm very proud of Kari. I'm very proud of her team for having the backbone and the guts to stand up to these evil people. Okay. And some people say, well, we got to get more moderate. We got to get more moderate so that we win more elections. Are you kidding me? We have to stand on what's right. Because if we get more moderate, that means we're moving further left and further left and further left. And we're judging our decisions and how we're going to live on the basis of how we compare to the other side. And we do not want to be there. Now, I want to tell you something, and I'm not advocating for this as a solution, but the founders of this country, I want you to hear how zealous and how committed they were. James Madison said, the ultimate authority resides in the people alone. And the founders of the Constitution, all the other documents that we have, they firmly believed that the power rests in the people. He said, the ultimate authority resides in the people alone. The advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, forms a barrier against the enterprises of ambition. So we have some very ambitious people here who are willing to lie, cheat, and steal to get power. And we do have a safeguard against that. And I hope to God it never comes to that. But keeping that Second Amendment alive is very important. Like I heard, I forget who it was at America Fest, they said, I think it might have been Kari, the Second Amendment is the most important one because it protects all of the other ones. And again, the amendments or the Bill of Rights, they're not giving us our rights. They're documenting some of the natural rights that we have. And I'm going to keep saying that over and over until people get it. Natural rights are given by God, and no one has the right to take them away. And one of your natural rights is to make your voice heard, to have a voice in electing your leaders. Yes, and leaders, not rulers. Nobody rules us but God. Nobody. I will be ruled by no one. They work for us. The people rule in America. We don't have kings. Now, John Adams said, arms in the hands of individual citizens may be used at individual discretion for the defense of the country, the overthrow of tyranny, or in private self-defense. Now, one thing I suggested was that the founders had the mantra, no taxation without representation. And if we keep having our votes stolen, if we keep having unfair, dirty elections, that should be a consideration. And look at how bad our government is right now. Sending our hard-earned money overseas and yet not protecting our border. How bad does it have to get before we say, you guys don't deserve to be paid? That's just something I want everybody to think about. But you all have a good night. Send in your questions and comments. Give us your impressions of the trial. And my understanding is the judge is going to go back and deliberate on this to give it due diligence, and then he will come out with a ruling. So we will talk to you soon.